we're told that there is a ceasefire between the Poroshenko-Yatsenyuk gang on the one side and the People's Republics of Donetsk and Lugansk on the other. This took place in the city of Minsk. I guess the good offices of the Belarus government were called into play. Russia had tried to point out earlier in the week that they are not a party to the civil war in Ukraine. This is a Ukrainian show with both sides being aided from outside. But now we have the ceasefire. Most opinion, I think, is that this is simply a pause to regroup for both sides, and in particular, the ones who needed the regrouping were the Kiev fascist forces. By my count, off the maps I've been able to see, there were 7 pockets, 7 encirclements of Kiev fascist forces in the eastern Ukrainian area, meaning that those forces were on their way to annihilation. And we were thinking back to Stalingrad. What else can you say, right? The encirclements. When von Paulus at Stalingrad was surrounded, right? Hitler made him a field marshal, and that accompanied the order, you must never surrender. So we had, instead of Hitler this week, we had Poroshenko, a reasonable facsimile. Poroshenko told the Ukrainian forces who were pocketed that they should fight to the death, they should not surrender, for the greater glory of Poroshenko. Now, in terms of the terminology, you hear this stuff described as a cauldron. Cauldron is the back translation, I think, from via Russian of the German Kessel. These are Kesselschlacht events. In English, it's a pocket, as in the Falaise pocket. So we have 7 pockets of Ukraine fascist forces over there. Now, at the same time, though, given the humiliation and the defeat of the Kiev fascist clique, you've got right sector, and this is Yarosh, but it's now Yarosh. Yarosh is another little Hitler running around there, but it's Yarosh as the puppet of Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky is now the extreme fascist wing. He's like Qatar in the Arab Spring. Kolomoisky is to the Ukrainian fascist constellation. And you can see that what they have in mind is this. Since Poroshenko and Yatsenyuk are discredited, they've also got, by the way, Yatsenyuk has got problems. The International Monetary Fund paid a tranche, almost $2 billion, I guess, on the promised loans to Ukraine. But the IMF then said, you won't get any more tranches of this money unless and until you implement our reforms, which means all that stuff, right? Sell off the Black Earth, sell off the pipelines, sell off Krivoy Rog, sell off the Donetsk, destroy the social safety net, bust all the unions, and on, double the price of gas, all things that would tend to accelerate the disintegration of the Kiev fascist regime. So, given all that, the Yarosh Kolomoisky, maybe we're talking about the difference between Nazis and fascists, right? Something like that. The government fascist and these Kolomoisky people more on the National Socialist wing. They are marching, concentrating at least in Kiev for what looks to me like an attempt at a second revolution. And you'll remember what this means. Hitler took power in January 1933, but by the spring, summer of 1934, we had Ernst Röhm, R-O umlaut H-M, and his SA brown shirts, the proletarian wing, who were clamoring for a second revolution where the army generals, the bankers, the politicians would all be thrown out and these plebeian Nazis would be put in. And this, of course, led to Hitler pulling the night of the long knives, where he massacred all these people. His lawyer, Carl Schmitt, defended all this in court. And it seems like it may be heading in that direction. Imagine if you get a civil war or mini-civil war breaking out in Kiev in the middle of all this. Won't that be embarrassing for the pro-Western forces, right, for NATO in particular, since they bet everything on this. You notice that Obama hears no fascists, sees no fascists, doesn't smell any. His speech in Estonia, a wretched performance. We'll be back in a minute. Radio, I want to thank the distinguished radio personality Lionel, until recently, I think, of WPAX Channel 11 in New York, formerly on Air America, very well known, made some very nice remarks about yours truly. So we thank Lionel, and you can find him at Lionel Media, and you can find Lionel Media on Twitter, and we hope to talk to him. Maybe we can get him on here to talk to our audience when we get into the hot stove season here in November and December, after our big election struggles are over. Now, the question right now, city of Mariupol, right? A pro-Russian column is advancing towards Mariupol. Notice that the people defending are the Azov battalion. These are absolute, outright declared Nazis with the Wolfsangel, with the Black Sun, and they've got essentially a kind of European SS. They got snipers from Sweden. They got French fascists, Foreign Legion veterans, I suppose. And they're all over there in Mariupol trying to keep the pro-Russian forces out. I think it's a question of time now until Mariupol is liberated from the fascists. Now, let me also point out, right, this whole thing, the Ukrainian army was defeated. 7 of their main units pocketed and on their way to annihilation. Pattern was, as we went through, artillery by the Ukrainian regular army from the outside, and then the Einsatzgruppen were sent in. Those would be the right sector, described now as National Guard, and they're getting massacred. So that's the resentment of the right sector, Pravy sector, against the constituted government now, bandit regime in Kiev. Notice now, though, in terms of the dynamics inside NATO, warmongers, we have 2 politicians in particular, Hollande and Cameron, who are acting as warmongers according to the time-honored formula: if you're in trouble at home, create a war. Remember, in July 1914 and August 1914, Great Britain was widely thought to be on the verge of civil war. And the question was Ireland. The Irish Catholic provinces, right, in other words, non-Ulster, wanted at least home rule, right? They wanted independence, but the only way to dodge that was home rule. So there was a home rule law that was going to be put in by the liberal government of Asquith and the unspeakable Earl Grey, and that was coming to a head in May, June, July of 1914, and it was thought the Ulstermen were opposed to this. So the Ulstermen were saying, we'll fight. We'll pick up arms and we'll fight. And the grave danger was that the officer corps of the British Land Army, right, always inferior in social status to the Navy, the senior service, the Ulster officers of the British Army were thought to be unreliable. They might go over to the Ulster side and stop the central government under Asquith and the Liberal Party from establishing home rule in Southern Ireland while keeping Ulster under direct British controlled administration. Right? That was the Cameron, the compromise that they were trying to work out. Well, then let's look at it from a sort of political point of view. Right? Let's look at Hollande first. It's more fun. His former wife, Madame Trierweiler, she has put out a book where she reveals that Hollande says he hates the poor because he's always accused of hating the rich. No, she says that's all eyewash, right? He hates the poor, and he told me so. Hollande calls poor people the toothless ones. Are you toothless? Then Hollande doesn't like you. An insult to French dentists. There's another group that he lost. He's down to 13% popularity after this, and it's being published everywhere. It's going to be a bestseller everywhere in the world. And then on the other side, Cameron, of course, very unpopular, austerity ghoul. And think about, in order to govern, he's got to have this Liberal Democrat Party. This guy Clegg, this character is practically entombed in this government. So he's extremely unpopular. And this Scottish referendum is coming up now. I certainly would like to see Cameron out. I would warn people in Scotland, do not vote for this fake independence of Scotland. This is a fraud. This is a Bantustan you'll be getting. That will not be an independent country by any stretch of the imagination. It will be the kind of thing that was used for counterinsurgency purposes under British traditions in South Africa. The Bantustans, self-administration, autogestion, practically self-management for this area. You will still have the Queen. You'll still have the Bank of England. You'll probably still have the European Union. You still have NATO. If you're lucky, it's not independence. It's a fraud. And, of course, what it would then do is to solidify England as a completely reactionary state, which would then be even more of a warmonger force than it is right now, right? It would be Colonel Blimp in person as Prime Minister. All right. So this is the situation. Kiev is near financial collapse, and the war psychosis everywhere in the Wales summit. And in particular, the ones who needed the regrouping were the Kiev fascist forces. By my count, off the maps I've been able to see, there were 7 pockets. We're told that there is a ceasefire between the Poroshenko-Yatsenyuk gang on the one side and the People's Republics of Donetsk called into play. Russia had tried to point out earlier in the week that they are not a party to the civil war in Ukraine. This is a Ukrainian show with both sides being aided from outside. But now we have the ceasefire. Most opinion, I think, is that this is simply a pause to regroup for both sides, Donetsk and Lugansk on the other. This took place in the city of Minsk. I guess the good offices of the Belarus government were